She was America's sweetheart, the smile that could light up the silver screen, the charm that made hearts melt in every corner of the world. Julia Roberts was never just a movie star. She was a symbol of hope, grace, and joy in an industry known for its darkness. But behind the dazzling success, the red carpets, and the unforgettable roles, was a woman who was quietly fighting battles that no camera ever captured. Now at 57, the world is finally beginning to see what she's carried all along. And the truth is far more heartbreaking than anyone ever imagined, from childhood wounds that never fully healed to betrayals that left her questioning everything. Julia's journey has been one of survival beneath the spotlight. While fans remember her radiant performances in Pretty Woman, Erin Brockovich, and My Best Friend's Wedding, few know the personal tragedies that haunted her between each take. The family trauma, the isolation, the pressure to be perfect, and now, as she steps further away from the Hollywood chaos, those closest to her say the pain she kept hidden is finally beginning to surface. What really happened to Julia Roberts when the cameras stopped rolling? Why does someone so loved, so admired, carry such a deep and lingering sadness? And why are those who know her best now saying that her greatest role was pretending everything was okay? Stay with us as we uncover the emotional weight behind the world's brightest. Smile, because the tragedy of Julia Roberts isn't just a Hollywood story, it's a human one. Long before she became the most bankable actress in Hollywood, Julia Roberts was just a girl from Smyrna, Georgia, born into a world where dreams felt impossibly far away and pain was far closer than anyone knew. Her childhood wasn't golden. It was fractured. Her parents, both actors and drama teachers, divorced when she was just 4 years old. And while her mother tried to hold the family together, her stepfather, a man whose presence would forever mark Julia's youth, cast a long, dark shadow. Though Julia has remained tight-lipped for decades, her older sister Nancy and brother Eric have alluded to a deeply troubled home, one marked by emotional instability and unspoken trauma. Julia would grow up fast, retreating into imagination, learning early on that in order to survive, you had to perform, even off stage. The radiant smile she would one day be famous for, it was already taking shape, not as an expression of joy but as a shield, a disguise. Her brother Eric Roberts, also an actor, was the first to chase Hollywood, and for a while, Julia was in his shadow. But by the late 1980s, everything changed. One audition after another, Julia began carving her own path. Mystic Pizza, Steel Magnolias, and then, in 1990, Pretty Woman. Overnight, she wasn't just a rising star, she was a phenomenon. That beaming grin, that effortless charm, it was magnetic. But behind the glamour, Julia remained haunted by the fractures of her past. The family drama, the estranged relationships, and the childhood wounds that never really closed. Even as she stood at the pinnacle of fame, Julia remained a woman deeply uncomfortable with her own image. The world called her perfect. She felt anything but. What fans didn't know at the time was that Julia's success came at a price. She was being swallowed whole by a system that wanted her to be one thing, forever radiant, forever romantic, forever agreeable. She played the role to perfection, but in private, she was breaking. Personal relationships began to collapse under the weight of fame, engagements called off, trust betrayed, friendships lost in the chaos of superstardom. And even as she smiled for the cameras, insiders say Julia often felt like an imposter, still that uncertain girl from Georgia, still carrying the shame of her broken family, still longing for a version of peace that fame could never deliver. She once said in an interview, "People say, oh, she's got it all. But you don't know what I've had to walk through just to stand here." Those who knew her best saw the cracks early. They saw the perfectionist who couldn't sleep, the superstar who would disappear between projects, the actress who, even on Oscar night, seemed distant, almost detached. And maybe that's the tragedy we never understood, that Julia Roberts didn't just survive Hollywood, she endured it. And all the while she did what she learned to do as a child, she performed. But behind the most iconic smile of her generation was a woman quietly holding together the shattered pieces of a childhood that never gave her space to simply exist. As Julia Roberts soared into superstardom, The fairy tale she sold on screen often stood in brutal contrast to the chaos unraveling behind closed doors. While audiences clung to her characters, the quirky best friend, the brave legal crusader, the radiant runaway bride, Julia's real life was unraveling beneath the weight of relentless scrutiny, heartbreak, and betrayal. Her first high-profile romance with actor Liam Neeson ended quietly, but the press didn't care. They needed a narrative, and they found one in her whirlwind engagement to Kiefer Sutherland. The two were Hollywood's golden couple until they weren't. Just days before the wedding, Julia fled the relationship entirely, canceling the ceremony and leaving the country with Sutherland's best friend, Jason Patric. The tabloids feasted on it. They branded her a homewrecker, a diva, a heartbreaker. But no one paused to ask what she had endured. What kind of emotional fracture could drive a woman to run away from her own wedding? Julia never offered a full explanation, and maybe that silence was its own quiet scream. From there, the narrative around her changed. She was no longer just America's sweetheart. She became tabloid prey. The more she pulled away from the spotlight, the more the press insisted on following. Failed romances with Daniel Day-Lewis, Matthew Perry, and Benjamin Bratt became public theater. Every breakup was a headline. Every appearance was analyzed. And when Julia met cameraman Danny Moder, who was still married at the time, the media turned on her with venom. Accusations of infidelity, betrayal, and manipulation painted her as a villain. But what no one saw was how desperately she wanted to escape the carousel of fame. Moder offered her something no one else had: normalcy. And Julia, for the first time in years, felt safe enough to reach for it, regardless of the cost to her reputation. But safety didn't mean peace. Even as she married Moder in 2002 and stepped away from blockbuster roles, the emotional scars lingered. She remained haunted by the past, by the unstable childhood, the broken trust, the ever-watchful cameras. Her relationship with her family, especially her older brother Eric Roberts, continued to be strained, though both would later speak of reconciling after long periods of distance. Yet the most devastating fracture came in 2014, when Julia's half-sister Nancy Moats died by suicide. In a heartbreaking note left behind, Moats accused Julia of cruelty, emotional manipulation, and lifelong rejection. The headlines were merciless, and Julia, the woman who had carried herself through so much with silence and grace, finally broke. Friends said she became reclusive, shattered by grief and guilt. The smile faded, the sparkle dulled, and for a while she vanished from the world she once ruled. Because for Julia Roberts, fame had never been a gift. It had been a burden, a lifelong performance that masked the pain of never quite feeling loved for who she truly was. And at the height of her success, she was left asking the question that echoed louder than applause. What is the price of being beloved by millions if you feel invisible to yourself? That's the tragedy few noticed. She gave the world joy, laughter, love. But the world never gave her the space to be just Julia, a woman still trying to heal from wounds that no award could ever soothe. By the mid-2000s, Julia Roberts, once the face of Hollywood itself, began to step out of the frame. Not with a scandal, not with a fall from grace, but with a slow, intentional withdrawal. A fading that felt almost invisible until you realized how deeply you missed her. She no longer attended every awards show. No more tabloid sightings on Rodeo Drive. No breathless updates from studio lots. It wasn't just that the roles stopped. It was that she stopped chasing them. For a woman who had once carried the weight of an entire industry's expectations, disappearing was its own kind of rebellion. She moved to a ranch in New Mexico with her husband Danny Moder and their children, far away from the velvet ropes and flashing cameras. There, she tried to find something Hollywood had never given her: stillness. But even as she embraced nature and motherhood, the pain never truly left. Friends say she often spoke about not feeling real, that years of performing, on and off screen, had left her, questioning who she actually was beneath the persona the world had built for her. Though she'd occasionally return to the screen, something was different. The sparkle was dimmer, the confidence more cautious. Films like August, Osage County, and Ben is Back revealed a deeper Julia, a woman wrestling not with characters, but with herself. In interviews, she smiled, laughed, charmed like always. but her eyes carried something heavier. And if you listened closely, you could hear it. The exhaustion of someone who had spent a lifetime pretending to be okay. She spoke often about privacy, about balance, about the importance of her family, but never quite about healing. Because some wounds, especially the kind inflicted in childhood and magnified by fame, don't close, they echo. And Julia, in her retreat, was still listening to those echoes every day. Perhaps the most tragic aspect of Julia's story is that her disappearance from the public eye was met not with empathy, but with indifference. A new generation of stars rose, the red carpets moved on, and the industry she helped define no longer paused to ask why she was gone. Fame has always moved forward, but behind the scenes, Julia's life had narrowed. She became increasingly private, rarely spotted outside of tightly controlled appearances. And though she occasionally posted sunny Instagram photos or joined interviews for streaming projects, the woman once adored for her light now seemed to exist only in shadows. Sources close to her say she became more anxious, more withdrawn, hesitant to trust, and deeply sensitive to any media attention, no matter how small. What the world never fully grasped is that Julia Roberts was never chasing attention. She was running from abandonment. From the abandonment of her father. From the emotional distance of her mother. From the betrayal of lovers and the cruelty of press. Her life was not a glamorous rom-com. It was a long, quiet search for safety. And as she turned away from the spotlight, she wasn't just choosing privacy, she was choosing survival. But the cost? A woman once adored by millions now feels invisible to herself. Not forgotten by Hollywood, but erased by the very machine that made her. So when we look back at Julia Roberts today, we don't just see a legend. We see a survivor. A woman who carried the weight of the world's expectations on her back, and then finally said, enough. And yet, in that retreat, in that vanishing act, lies the quiet tragedy of it all. She gave us everything, but never found a space to keep anything for herself. Today, at 57, Julia Roberts stands not at the center of the red carpet, but on the distant edges of it, still glowing. Still smiling, but somehow unreachable. Her name still echoes through the industry with reverence. Her face still graces magazine covers on occasion. But the woman behind the image remains a mystery even now, perhaps more than ever before. And that's the quiet heartbreak. Not that she fell from grace, but that the world never truly understood what it took for her to remain standing. Beneath the fairy tales she brought to life, Pretty Woman, Notting Hill, Runaway Bride, there was a woman quietly fighting for her own happy ending. One without scripts, without paparazzi, without having to perform joy when she wasn't feeling it. In a world that demanded sparkle, she longed only for quiet. And while she may have escaped Hollywood's cruel rhythms, she hasn't escaped the echo of its expectations. Even now, people ask, where has Julia gone? Why doesn't she work more? Why does she hide? But maybe the real question is, how did she last so long without breaking sooner? Those close to her say she still struggles with identity, still wonders if her fame was a blessing or a beautiful kind of prison. Yes, she has a husband, children, a quiet life away from the noise. But when the spotlight fades, when the applause dies, there is no script for what comes next. Julia's tragedy isn't in scandal or public collapse. It's in the silence she was forced to retreat into just to breathe. In the way the industry used her light until it flickered. And now, after decades of giving herself to the world, she's learning how to be Julia for the first time. Not the character, not the icon, just Julia. It's a painful transformation. Because fame once devoured doesn't let go so easily. It haunts, it stalks, it whispers questions late at night. Was I ever loved for who I really am? Do they miss me or the version of me they created? And Julia, who once dazzled nations with a single smile, now faces the quiet truth that her most unforgettable role was the one she never auditioned for, being everything to everyone. Her story is not one of dramatic collapse. It is far more human, far more devastating. A woman who learned to smile while slowly vanishing. And yet there's still a beauty in her solitude. She is raising her children far from flashing cameras, walking barefoot through her ranch, reading in the morning sun without needing anyone's approval. There is healing in that, A slow stitching of old wounds, a reclaiming of a life that was never fully hers to begin with. And maybe, just maybe, there is hope. Hope that the girl from Georgia who once had to pretend everything was fine finally knows she doesn't have to anymore. That the silence can be peaceful, not punishing. That legacy isn't about the number of roles played, but the courage it takes to finally stop performing. Because at 57, Julia Roberts may not belong to Hollywood anymore. But perhaps for the first time in her life, she finally belongs to herself. And that might be the greatest ending of all.